I don't play for all-star nods.
You are Locked On Fantasy Basketball, your daily podcast on fantasy basketball. The Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello and welcome to the Locked On Fantasy Basketball podcast brought to you by Fantrax and Basketball Monster. And today's Locked On Fantasy Basketball podcast is also brought to you by Brent Veal, who is today's Patreon sponsor. If you want to be like Brent, head across to patreon.com/redrock_bball. My name is Josh Lloyd, and you can find me as always on Twitter at redrock_bball. There's a shitload of stuff to get to today, so
let's get to it.
We've got all 9 of Friday's games. We've got 11 games on Saturday to preview. Let's kick things off with the monstrous line of the night, and that goes to Kemba Walker of the Charlotte Hornets. It was a very tightly contested monstrous line of the night, but it goes to Kemba today. He was fantastic in limited minutes as well. 32 points, 4 rebounds, 8 assists. He hit 6 triples. He went 11 of 16 from the field, and he hit 4 of his 5 free throws. And as I said, he did that in under 29 minutes in a huge blowout victory over the Toronto Raptors. Kemba has now scored 20 plus points in 4 of the last 5 games. He's hit multiple 3-pointers in 7 consecutive games. He's the 20th ranked player this season. There was some doubt whether he could keep up what he did last year, where he increased his field goal percentage by 4%. Well, this year he's taken it up by another 4%, and he was one of the ultimate punt field goal percentage players in the league. Oh, you got to punt field goals with Kemba, he kills you. He's less than 40%. He's 47% this year. That is such a significant jump, and he's now a 43% three-point shooter, shooting at true shooting of 59%. That is a tremendous turnaround. It's a ridiculous turnaround, to be honest, from Kemba Walker. Not only has he increased his true shooting this year, but he's taken his usage up from 26 up to 29. He has been remarkably good. I'm not sure he gets into the All-Star game, but I do think that he deserves a spot. I am going to do my reserves at some point next week. He's averaging 23, 4, and 5.5, even increasing his assists marginally, but increasing them, hitting 3 triples a game and getting you 1.3 steals on those fantastic percentages. So really good stuff from Kemba. If you invested that pick, hoping that he's going to give you what he did last year, you'd be pretty happy because he's improved in a number of areas, and you can't really ask for much more from a guy than improving on a breakout year, which is exactly what he's done. Tonight's waiver wire line of the night is also the young gun of the night, because it is one of my boys. It is Caris LeVert of the Brooklyn Nets, and I told you, he's going to be a good fantasy player. I don't know how good he's going to be a real-life NBA player, but he is a good fantasy player. Caris LeVert had 17 points. He had 5 rebounds. He had 6 assists. He had 3 triples. He had a steal. He had a block. He was a perfect 6 of 6 from the field, and he was a perfect 2 of 2 from the free throw line. The kid is playing well. In only 23 minutes a game over the last 2 weeks, he's the 133rd ranked player, averaging 10, 3, and 2.5. 1.5 threes, a steal a game, shooting 53 and 70. So I do expect that shooting to come down, but his advantage is his ability to get assists. He gets assists, he gets rebounds, he gets steals, he hits threes, and he can do it all relatively efficiently. And you know the golden rule with rookies. Who's in front of them? Is it someone good or is it someone useless? The Nets, it's Joe Harris. Yeah, so there's a fair chance that we're going to see a fair chunk of Caris LeVert down the stretch. Relying upon this is tough. So in a situation where you're battling for a playoff spot, it might be tough to drop someone of consistent value to grab him. If you're in a really sweet position in the standings, grab him. As I've said this plenty of times as well, I think my thing that I used to say is I think he's going to be top 150 after the All-Star break. Well, Josh, he's already there. He's already top 150 over these last 2 weeks. He could be a top 100 guy after the All-Star break. So if you were sitting in a position of power, adding Caris LeVert, the upside is definitely there. They were going to bring him on slowly, and they are still bringing him on slowly, but it's not really mattering, and he's pushing their hand for more minutes, and more minutes are coming. He is putting up good production. He does have a very good fantasy profile, but remember, these shooting numbers, they're not going to stick. He won't continue to shoot. He's at 64% over the last 3 games. That won't stick. 53 over the last 7 games. That also won't stick. But the other numbers, that's pretty representative of what Levert can do. So if you're in a battle for playoff spots, you know what? Maybe add him as he's hot as a stream, but I wouldn't be just holding him for weeks and weeks, hoping for this 30-point or 30-minute explosion. But in a position of power, you might have 3 weeks up your sleeve where you can hold on to Karras and you can just wait it out. But he is a guy that people did criticize this draft class, and rightfully so. There hasn't been a huge amount of studs out of it, but there's very nice depth pieces that went late in the draft. He is one of them. Brogdon was the other guy that I was pretty high on, and a third guy I was pretty high on is a player we'll talk about later on, Timothé Luwawu-Cabarrot, who is really starting to come on now as well in the NBA. There's some guys who I was pretty happy with getting drafted late, and I thought they all should have gone fairly significantly higher, and they're all showing some good stuff at the moment. But Levert is your waiver wire line of the night. He is your young gun of the night, and he's and again, shout out to Charles Oakley for the Karras Levert jersey that he sent me, which I've got up here behind me. So thank you, Charles, for that Karras jersey. You know that I'm a big Karras fan. I think I've almost got the set of my boys. Which jersey? I'm missing an Evan Fournier jersey out of the my boy group. I'm missing I don't have a Brogdon jersey. I've got a Jokic. I've got an Embiid. I've got a Rubio. I'm trying to think. I've got a fair selection of the my boys anyway, and Karras is the latest addition to that, and he is clearly one of my boys, and this was a very, very pleasing performance to see from Karras. So the questions I was getting inundated with, and you know what also became clear to me today about Twitter in general is that a lot of people who follow me on Twitter don't listen to the podcast. Because I get a lot of questions, what do you think of Karras Levert? Like, if you listen to the podcast, you know that I really like him. You should know that I'm a huge fan of Karras Levert, and I think he can be a very, very impactful fantasy player. So, what do you think? Do you think he's good in 16-team leagues? I was getting that question today. So, I wasn't aware that. I thought the majority of people that follow me on Twitter would listen to the podcast. I think I've talked about Levert plenty of times on the show, but some people on Twitter just don't listen to the show and get advice in different ways through Twitter, which is something, I guess it just opened my eyes to that today, because again, I think if you had to listen to the show, you would have heard me talking about Levert from months ago, would be my guess. Let's move on now to let's just flash up the young gun graphic for Karras so he doesn't get ripped off. The dud of the night is Derek Favors. 5 points for Derek, 4 rebounds, 1 block on 2 of 5 shooting, 1 of 2 free throws. For as many Karras Levert questions as I got today, I probably got as many, what are we doing with Favors? Are we running out of patience? Look, the patience should be running thin, definitely. He's ranked outside the top 200 for this season in 23 minutes a game. He's ranked outside the top 160 in the last 2 weeks in 28 minutes a game. But do you know why? Not only is it the minutes, which they're a pain in the ass, but for some reason he can't shoot. We talk about these players who have taken big jumps up in their shooting, Kemba Walker, Isaiah Thomas, Kyle Lowry, these huge jumps up in field goal percentage, which we say, maybe this isn't sustainable to jump up by 9% in your field goals for the year. For some reason, Derek Favors has taken his true shooting percentage down from 55, and it's been at 55 the previous 3 seasons. He's down to 48. That's a 7% dip. All his per 36 numbers, rebounding, exactly the same. Assists, 1.4 versus 1.7. Steals, 1.2 versus 1.3. Blocks, 1.4 versus 1.7. These are all very similar. Points, 18 versus 14, because he's not hitting his shots. Free throws, down from 71 to 62, not hitting his shots. Field goals, down from 52 to 45, not hitting his shots. Very, very weird that he's just not hitting those shots. He gets his shot in order. He hits the shots, then his numbers are basically identical to what we've had from Derek Favors from years past on a per minute basis, and then we hope that he gets back to 30 minutes. I still think that he's a guy that you do want to hold on to. In an 8-team league, you probably want to piss him off. In a 10-team league, it's getting dicey, absolutely. If you're in a situation where you're battling for seeding, then you may have to. I probably wouldn't do it, but you may have to. It has been a frustrating ride, but it's just that for some reason over the first 30 games of the year, he hasn't been able to shoot. He hasn't been able to play enough minutes, but he hasn't been able to shoot. And I do believe that will rectify. I just hope that we can get back to 30 minutes. It's not as if someone's come in and playing out of their brain and it's keeping him from getting back to and it's not like Quinton Snyder's going, well, you know what? We don't need Derek Favors playing 30 minutes a night because Boris Diaw is killing it, because Jeff Withey's giving us something, because Trey Lyles has really had a second-year breakout. Like, none of those things have happened. Diaw's been disappointing. Lyles has been disappointing. Withey doesn't play at all. So there is this opportunity for favours. He just can't seem to grasp it at the moment. It is quite a weird phenomenon that he just can't seem to hit any shots after being such a consistent source of shot making and scoring over the course of his career. Got the graphics fixed for the box scores for you people who do watch the video, as you can tell. We're going to talk about the games now in a bit of extra detail. The first one of those games is the Portland Trailblazers and the Philadelphia 76ers. Man, Embiid's back. The Sixers win again, 93-92. Embiid did go to the locker room approximately 75 million times in this game, and eventually he was ruled out, unable to return. Do you know what? He played 22 minutes and still went 18, 10, and 5 with 4 blocks. He got to the line 9 times, only hit 4 of them in an oddity, but still put up ridiculous numbers despite playing just 22 minutes. Now Embiid is going to be out on Saturday, but I just wanted to talk. I'll talk about Portland in a sec, but that is just ridiculous from Joel. On to the Blazers. Dame Lillard had 30 points on 25 shots, really efficient. Not much else happening for him, while CJ McCollum was very disappointing on 5 of 18 shooting. He had 16 points, he had 3 steals, he had 4 assists, so helped out in other areas, but clearly a subpar performance if you used him in DFS scenario. Now Terry Stotts changed things up a little bit. Very, very last second, changed the starting lineup. Mo Harkless was out. Al-Farouq Aminu was out so that we could get, and I don't want to be too unkind here, the worst player in the NBA, Evan Turner, into the starting lineup, and potentially the second worst player in the NBA, Noah Vonleh, into the starting lineup. I say that in jest because we know that Sasha Vujacic and Metta World Peace hold those positions. But elevating Evan Turner and Noah Vonleh into the starting lineup really doesn't make a massive amount of sense. We don't know if this is permanent. We don't know if this was because it was a back-to-back scenario. We've got no idea. But the Blazers did need to change something up because they were getting smashed. Didn't help because they still lost to the Sixers. As for Aminu, he had 9 and 9 in 22 minutes. You own him, you still stick the course. As for Harkless, I was already talking about him being a drop candidate, and I think you've got to consider it. 19 minutes, 3 and 4 with 2 blocks. I was very big on Harkless for the first 2 months of the year, but things change, situations change, opinions change, and you've got to move with the times. In a 10-team league, if you own Harkless, I don't think there's any need to continue to do that. In a 12-team league, it's more borderline, but he is trending down in a significant way, and a lot of it's been to do with the play of Al-Farouq Aminu, not so much in this one as they both were benched. But look, just a weird substitution scenario from Stotts. As for Vonleh, he played 26 minutes, 10 and 5. He remains not good. This was not a terrible night. 10 and 5 is a decent performance. And then if I was in a 20-team league, I would consider grabbing him, but I just don't really rate Vonleh at all. Mason Plumlee had 14 and 11 with 3 blocks, and Ed Davis returned from his injury, forcing Myers Leonard out of the rotation, 2 and 6 for Eddie, while Alan Crabb, $70 million man Alan Crabb, had 4 points in 25 minutes. That's Alan Crabb. That's exactly who he is. On to the Sixers. Ersan Ilyasova, tremendous. 24, 6 and 2, 5 triples, 2 steals, and a block. He went 9 of 14 from the field. He's a clear must-own guy, as is Bob Cove, 22 and 6, 5 triples, a steal, and a block, including the game winner. Huge stuff from Robert Covington. Really a guy that obviously tested people's patience early on, but he's paying it back now, and he's a guy that has to be owned in all leagues. Nerlens Noel had a much improved performance. Only the 5 points, but 9 boards and 2 steals in 21 minutes. This is going to be his role. I am super interested to see what happens on Saturday with Embiid out, whether they go 28-29 Noel, or whether they pull Jali Okafor out of the fire and give him an opportunity to play 28 minutes. I don't really know why you'd ever want to do that, but that's exactly what happened the last time that Embiid missed a game. As for Noel, really in a 10-team league, I reckon you're wasting a spot having Noel. In a 12-team league, it's fairly borderline. TJ McConnell's a guy that should be owned though, 8, 4, and 5 in his 31 minutes, while Source Castillo started and played 22 minutes, 2 points, 3 assists, and a block. The guy I did want to talk about, Timothé Luwawu-Cabarrot, not a great night. He had a Richie Beno, but not the traditional Richie Beno, but I just want an excuse to play this.
2 for 2.
He had 2 points, 2 rebounds, and 2 assists in his 14 minutes, but he's getting consistent minutes now. As I've said plenty of times, he was the reason that one of the reasons Hollis Thompson got cut, and I think he's going to be a very impactful player, especially when Ben Simmons comes back. Him and Simmons have a great chemistry. His ability to create space and move without the ball is one of the best. He's probably the best player on this team at doing that. And as a rookie, his ability, his awareness to get into position is really impressive. His ability to cut to the basket, his ability to move around is something that does separate him. He is a guy that is able to get assists as well. And his shooting's not great, but he can defend, he can score, he can move, he can create space, and he can set guys up. This is in a similar vein to the Karis LeVert situation. Who's ahead of him? Stauskas, Gerald, Henderson, not great players. I am much less convinced that he is going to be anywhere near a standard league guy this year. But when Simmons gets back, I think we might see in April, the last 5-6 games of the year, we might see some big Simmons-Luwawu-Cabarrot combinations, and him maybe getting 25, 26 minutes in those last 5 to 6 games and putting up some numbers in a good chemistry that he has. So that is something that when Simmons returns, everyone wants to see Simmons play. But watch Simmons and Luwawu-Cabarrot in the minutes they get together. It is going to be real interesting. The other guy that Simmons has got ridiculous chemistry with, this is coming from Summer League, so maybe you take it with a grain of salt, but him and Rashawn Holmes, crazy stuff. Now, he's going to be awesome, of course, with Embiid. I think he's going to work well working with Bob Carver, Nerlens Noel as well. But Holmes and Luwawu-Cabarrot, the understanding that those two guys had with Simmons was really impressive. That's a very deep dive on Sixers players who literally aren't even playing, Holmes and Simmons. But it is something to watch out for. Let's move on to the next game now. We've got the Milwaukee Bucks and the Orlando Magic. Big win for the Magic at home. Let's start with the Bucks. Jabari had 25, 6, and 6. And welcome return to form. He'd been a little bit down, but that's a good line from Jabari. Well, Yanni was good, but without being spectacular. 17, 14, and 5 on 6 of 17 shooting. The encouraging thing here is Malcolm Brogdon, 35 minutes, big minutes for the second consecutive game, 16, 2, and 5 with 4 triples and a steal, while Matty Dellavedova played only 13 minutes. Let's hope the kid can stick with this, but kid and stick with it in one sentence, it doesn't work. All you've got to do is look down to the bottom of the box score and see that Greg Monroe played 14 minutes. I don't understand what Kidd is doing. It's like he looked at it and went, oh, look at this, we're playing Monroe 27 minutes a game and we're winning. Nah, man, screw that shit. Let's put John Henson in there and Miles Plumlee so that we can limit what Monroe can do, and let's start losing winnable games. Because that's pretty much what's happening. Now, it's not all based on that, and Monroe has his deficiencies. I know. But seriously, 14 minutes? Nobody needs to see 16 minutes of Miles Plumlee. Literally no one needs to see that. Nobody. But here we are, introducing the 3-center scenario that was so ridiculous to begin the year, and having Monroe play the fewest minutes of all 3 of those centers. Johnny Henson had 8 and 5 in his 16, so he's not a worthy guy to go and grab. And all of a sudden, Rashad Vaughn back in favor. 10 minutes for 8 points. He shouldn't be in favor. You shouldn't be in favor of him anywhere. Lots of people asking about Chris Middleton as well. I believe I gave my thoughts on this the other day. It's just, he might come back at the All-Star game. He might not. But if he does, it's going to be very similar to a Paul George situation from a couple of years ago, that he's going to come back, and I think he's going to play 20 minutes a night, and it's not going to be useful. I don't really see us getting back to 35 minutes a night Chris Middleton this season. I would be doubtful if he appears before March, and then we're just going to get really limited time, and it's probably just going to cost you a 0 up until then, and then a half a man production through the fantasy playoffs, and it could end up being costly for you in that scenario. For the Magic, Lord Alfred Payton is really firing now. 37 minutes for Payton, 20 points, 4 rebounds, 6 assists, 3 steals, 2 triples, finishing at a great rate, hit all 6 of his free throws. Been fantastic. 25 minutes for Bismack Biyombo, 23 for Nick Vucevic, dislike. 13 and 13 for Biyombo is a good night, as is a steal and 4 blocks, but I wouldn't be excited, I wouldn't be overreacting to it, while Vucevic had 13 and 6. I do think that things will normalise there. Jody Meeks and Evan Fournier both out of this one, so CJ Watson started at shooting guard. He was terrible, as usual, because he's just terrible. 31 minutes for Watson, 5 and 5, while Mario Hezonja played 13 minutes, nowhere near enough, and DJ Augustine played 28. So Augustine, the guy he didn't play the most minutes, but he was the most beneficial, 10, 2, and 8 in those 28 minutes, a lot of that alongside Alfred Payton. So Augustine would be a 14-team league sort of a guy, whereas Watson is a 16 to 18 teamer, and Hezonja is barely any of that. Asa Gordon, 17 and 8 with 2 steals in 32 minutes. Very nice performance, while Serge Ibaka only saw the 22 minutes of playing time in this game. Also, Jeff Green.
My name is Jeff.
18 and 7 in 27 minutes with 2 blocks. It's a really good Jeff Green line, but it's Jeff Green. We know what Jeff Green is. We know what he does. We know how inconsistent he can be. Leave him for the 16-teamers, I believe. The Toronto Raptors and the Charlotte Hornets, this was a smackdown by the Hornets, 113-78. Kyle Lowry, inefficient Kyle Lowry, 3 of 10 from 3. He was 7 of 18 from the field for 24 points with 3 assists. Still an okay night, but the regression is starting to kick in a bit now. There was no Pat Patterson, there was no Bebe Nogueira, so of course Jonas Valanciunas plays only 25 minutes, 11 and 6 for JJ with a steal and a block, while DeMar DeRozan had JV, and DeMar DeRozan had 23 points and 2 assists in his 31 minutes. Not a lot else happening for this team. Normie Powell started, he was poor, 4 and 4 in 26 minutes on 2 of 9 shooting. Love Powell, not worth an ad in this scenario. While Damari Carroll has gone back to being shithouse Damari Carroll. 2 and 1 in 26 minutes for Carroll. I still believe that you hold on to him, although you know that I don't believe he has a very high upside. Jared Sullinger saw 17 minutes, 3 and 2 in those 17 minutes with 2 blocks. Leave him out of it. Don't think there's much need to really get excited. And the thing I was excited about in this game is Delon Wright was back. He didn't play, but he's back. I think that Delon Wright is a very good player. He is the 4th point guard on this team at the moment, behind Lowry, behind Corey Joseph, behind Fred VanVleet. So he's buried. I think that if he was in Chicago now, he'd be the starting point guard if he didn't have the injury. If he hadn't had injury, I think he'd be the starting point guard. I think he can be a useful fantasy piece as well. He's a name to watch come trade deadline, either if they decide to dispense with Corey Joseph, which I don't think they will, or they move Delon Wright out in a scenario that nets them a power forward, Paul Millsap maybe. He is a name to watch because, given an opportunity, if he moves into a 20-minute role, he's going to have, I would guess, top 200 sort of appeal, and I think he's a good upside. He's an older player. It is his 2nd season, but the times that we've seen him in big minutes, he's impressed me. So he's a name to watch now that he is back. For the Hornets, Frank Kaminsky had a big one, 16 and 8, 3 steals and a block. Very efficient stuff from Frank in those 27 minutes. And because he got the extra run there, Cody Zeller was limited to 23 minutes and Roy Hibbert played 19. Still believe that Zeller is a guy that you want to own, but he's been limited in the last 2 games. Blowout and foul trouble have stifled his production. Mick Kidd-Gilchrist, 31 minutes, 8 and 11 with a steal and a block. A perfect 14-team league guy, but I think that's where it sticks. While Batum had 13, 4 and 6 in his 31 minutes. Marv Williams just doing enough to sort of hang around. 10 and 8 in 21 minutes there for Big Marv. Let's move on to the next one. It is the Chicago Bulls and the Atlanta Hawks. The Bulls were embarrassingly bad until they had a massive 4th quarter comeback fueled by the bench guys. So we can look at this box score and it tells us jack shit, really. It tells us that Dwayne Wade was horrible. I know that. He had 4 points. It tells us that Jimmy Butler had 19 points in 29 minutes on 6 of 8 shooting and the Bulls still got killed. But not a lot else. What do we? I'll tell you what we can make of it. That Rajon Rondo is not a player that should be owned, but otherwise, it's really tough to know what to do with this sort of a performance. Carter Williams is not a must-own player in 12-team leagues. He had 3 points in 19 minutes. There's going to be games where Jaren Grant gets more playing time, where Denzel Valentine gets it, where Rondo gets it. It's just a complete mess in this sort of a situation. Also, throwing it out there, Doug McDermott's not a good player. I don't ever think he's going to become one. He had 2 points in 16 minutes. Wouldn't be good if we had Gary Harris as the Bulls. It would be pretty impressive. Not that Gary Harris has played a huge amount, but he is significantly better than Doug McDermott. For the Hawks, again, a blowout. So minutes a spread here. Den Schroeder, 25, 3 and 6. A huge night. Millsap, 14 and 9 with 2 blocks. Fantastic. Tabo had 10 and 4 with 3 steals. I think Tabo is more a steals specialist-y sort of guy, 14-team must-own guy, rather than a must-own 12-teamer. Timmy Hardaway had 9 points. He also added 3 assists and 3 steals, but I'd leave him for the 14-team formats. While Kent Bazemore, he Bazemored it in a big way, 2 and 2 in 19 minutes. It wasn't necessarily because he sucked. He did, but it wasn't necessarily because of that, because it was that blowout while Dwight Howard did struggle in this game. There's not really anything to talk about in the game that was as much, and it doesn't look like a blowout when the Hawks win by 9 points, but they were like 30 points up at the start of the 4th quarter. And then the Bulls just went on a huge run, fueled by their reserves. The Kings and the Grizzlies, the Kings' first game without Rudy Gay. Garrett Temple got the start and produced a really impressive line, 14, 3 and 3, 2 threes, a steal, 2 blocks on 5 of 9 shooting. If there's one thing we know about Garrett Temple is that he can't shoot. So I wouldn't be expecting that scoring and that field goal percentage to hold, but he can get some steals, and his assist rate does bump when Rudy Gay is out. So that's something that's interesting. He is far from a must-own 12-team league guy, but he's fine to be grabbed. He just doesn't have significant upside. Matty Barnes only saw the 18 minutes. He struggled, so it's going to be hard to consider him a 12-team league guy. While Anthony Tolliver played 26 minutes. He'll be better than this Tolliver. He did shoot 2 of 9 for 6 and 4, but he's more a 14 to 16 team league guy, as is Barnesy. Boogie had 19 and 10, a subpar performance from Boog, while Aaron Aflalo had 5 points. That's actually an overachievement for Aaron. He did have 4 steals there, but leave him for the deepest of deep leagues. Ty Lawson chimed in with a nice 13 and 4 and 5 line in 23 minutes, but you're predicting consistency out of Ty Lawson and out of that whole point guard scenario is fraught with danger. I thought this was a nice opportunity without Gay for Collison to get some extra usage. He scored 4 points. So trusting either of Lawson or Collison in 12-team leagues is not worth it. Sure, you can own either, but my guess is they're going to be the 13th best player on your roster. And you know what that means. It means they're in the drop zone. So fine, own one of them, whichever one you find sexier, grab them, hold them, drop them. That's the way it's going to go for these guys, it feels like, for the rest of the season. For the Grizz, Chandler Parsons was out resting here, so Jimmy Ennis, he made the start. He played 35 minutes for 10, 6, and 3. Just leave him for the 18-team leaguers, while Marcus Gasol had 28, 9, and 4, and Conley had 16, 8, and 8. Big numbers from the big guns there in a pretty comfortable victory in the end. Vince Carter's little mini resurgence continued, 11 and 4 with 2 steals and 2 triples, and he is a 16-team league guy, while Zebo had 20 and 10 in 24 minutes after a horrific game, the last one, Zebo. So he is as up and down as anybody, as is JaMychal Green, who had 4 and 7 after a big double-double, and that is why I just don't trust either of these guys as 12-team league players. I think they're both more suited to being 14-teamers. Tone Allen had 13 and 10. To me, he is a steals specialist guy, which can give him a permanent spot on a 12-team roster, but it's not a necessity. Troy Daniels also hurt his knee in this game, did not return. If he happens to miss some time, there's going to be some extra minutes for Andy Harrison and for Jimmy Ennis and Vince Carter as well. Not that Daniels is really owned in any sort of formats. Brooklyn and New Orleans, not only did Brooklyn travel, not only did Brooklyn beat the Pelicans, but Brooklyn put up 143 points on the Pelicans. 143. The Pelicans scored 114. Let's start with Brooklyn. They were resting Sean Kilpatrick, who's been horrible anyway, and Trevor Booker was out, so they started Justin Hamilton. They started... the rest of the starting five was the same because Kilpatrick's a bench player. I've talked about Karis LeVert already. Brook Lopez had 23 and 8 with 3 blocks, and Bojan Bogdanovic had 23 and 6 with a steal, a block, and 2 triples in a remarkably well-rounded performance for Bojan. He's fine for 12-team leagues, but I wouldn't be stressing too hard over him. Rondé Hollis-Jefferson only gets 18 minutes when Quincy Acey plays 22. That's pretty disgusting in my opinion, but Hollis Jefferson is producing 12 and 7, 2 assists, 1 steal. He's enough to be a 14-team league guy at the moment, and he's knocking on the door of 12 teams. If I had to choose between him and LeVert, I would pick LeVert, but Hollis Jefferson's getting closer to that guy that we envisaged he could be in the preseason. Quincy Acey, 12 and 8 in 22 minutes. I don't know why either. While Luis Scola had 14 points in his 8 minutes, he's not a player that usually sees action. He got that extra action with Trevor Booker out, and Spencer Dinwiddie had 10, 2, and 4 in his 28 minutes, while Isaiah Whitehead scored 7 in 29. Neither of those point guards is anything worth looking at outside of, say, a 16-team format. For the Pelicans, unsurprisingly, Anthony Davis had to go to the locker room. He was fine to return, but this just always happens with this guy. 22, 9, and 4, a steal and 2 blocks. Still some nice production, but this has been a horrible, horrible run for Davis. I think he's entered the locker room every game for 4 out of the last 5 games. Nothing serious, and that seems to always be the case with Davis. He cops a bump. It's like he's got hypersensitive pain receptors. And this is not a knock on the guy at all. You know, I'm the last person to knock someone for getting injured. But people do have different pain receptors, and it feels like he has these weird hypersensitive pain receptors that something gets hit and his body sort of goes into shock. And then he goes in there and settles down, and everything is fine after that. And it's a pain in the ass that he keeps missing time in these games, and some of that's to do with balance and all those other factors. But very rarely of late does it seem to be a serious problem. Now, he's had obviously the serious problems in the past with those torn labrums, and I never want to hear the term soft with Anthony Davis. I will internet fight you when you say that, but it's still a frustrating scenario. Dante Cunningham hit 4 threes. That's great. He had a block and 14 points in his 30 minutes, led the team in minutes because of course he did. He's a 16 to 18 team league guy, while Terry Jones, it's a nice line from Jonesy, 13 and 8 with 2 blocks. I don't really see the point in holding on to him. While Drew Holiday had 12, 3 and 8, and Bud Hield chimed in with 11 points. All in all, it was a disappointing performance from the Pelicans. We did get a Sheikh Diallo sighting, and he produced as he always does, and the fact that he can't get regular minutes is something that really bothers me as well. While Tyreek Evans was horrible, and he'd been very, very good up until this. Evans, he had 13 points on he had 8 points in 13 minutes on 2 of 10 shooting, 4 rebounds, no assists, and 2 steals. Not a great night from Tyreek, but he still has to be owned in all formats. For the Rockets, not the Rockets, for the Warriors and Rockets, which was the next game, the Warriors get the victory, 125-108. Kevin Durant, 32, 4 and 7, 2 steals and 2 blocks, a remarkably full line, while Draymond was also pretty full, 15, 8 and 7, a steal and 3 blocks. Steph had 24, 1 and 7 with 5 triples. Yeah, big games from the big guns. Klay Thompson was disappointing. 16 points on 19 shots and no other real production. While with David West's absence, we got Kevon Looney playing 11 minutes. And thankfully, we got no Andy Varejao. Also, JaVale McGee out of the rotation here. And again, Zaza Pachulia is coming. He's playing some extra minutes and he's more productive. 10 and 9 for Zaza with 2 steals. He is far from a 12-team league must-own, but he is absolutely a light schedule. Let's add this guy in 12-team leagues. When you look at the quality games days, and the Warriors have a lot of them, Zaza's the guy you add. It's not Andre Iguodala. It's not David West when he's playing. It's not Ian Clark. It's Zaza. He's the guy you add, and at the moment, you're getting very nice production from him. For the Rockets, Montrezl Harrell, the table, he started again at center. He had 8 and 3 in 27 minutes. But it was Clint Capella who went off here. 22 and 12 in 21 minutes, a steal and a block. That should make us all feel very good about Clint Capella. The minutes is still going to be somewhat of a concern. This game was without Nene, so some of those minutes that Nene gets have to come off Capella and they have to come off Harrell. And they played the entire 48 between them at center. 21 and 27 split. So 12 minutes to Nene has to come from somewhere. Does all 12 come off the table and he goes and plays 15 a night and Capella stays at 21? Maybe, but that really limits Capella to being a must-own guy. He's not getting 22 and 12 every night with a steal and a block. I know he's not. But he is obviously a guy that has the most potential out of these players and probably should be owned in 12s. And if you've still got Harrell, you hold on and see what happens. Big game from another one of my boys, Sammy Decker, 17 and 7 in 28 minutes. And I've said some outlandish things this year, but I still feel decently strongly about the fact that I think that the Rockets would be as good with Decker playing a lot more of Ryan Anderson's minutes. I know that Anderson provides this spacing threat, but how good's he actually been? The answer's, to me, not really all that good, and Decker's had his moments. Definitely needs to play more than Corey Brewer, who had 4 points in his 19 minutes here. Eric Gordon was horrendous, 2 of 12 for 6 in 33 minutes, while Pat Bev had 13, 3 and 2. Didn't even talk Jimmy Harden. Not a great Jim Harden night, 17, 7 and 11. We move on to the next game now. That is the Utah Jazz taking on the Dallas Mavericks. Rudy Gobert was fantastic, 27 and 25. He had a steal. He had 2 blocks. He was 8 of 11 from the field. He was a horrendous free throw shooter, to be honest, because 65% is not that bad. But you do it on 17 attempts, and that's wrecking teams' free throw percentage for the week, like wrecking it. And he did come close to the monstrous line of the night, but didn't quite get there. But that is a big, big burden for your free throw percentage if you weren't punting it. Joey Ingles started in place of Rod Hood again, and he put up a big line in big minutes. 12, 3 and 4, 3 steals and 2 triples. No problem with adding Joe Ingles until Hood returns. In a 12-team league, no issue at all. Gordie Hayward had 26, 7 and 4 in a very full line, and Joe Johnson also got some extra run. He had 15 and 5 in 31 minutes. Interestingly, Dante Exum and Shelvin Mack, both D&P CDs, as Hull Neto jumped the queue, and he is now the backup point guard. It's been that way for the last couple of games. It's a weird scenario, obviously. Alec Burks had 7 points in 12 minutes, while Georgie Hill didn't have a great night. 13 points in 31 minutes for Georgie, 1 rebound and 1 assist. For the Mavs, Seth Curry. Now, JJ Barea is going to be out weeks in this one here. He did hurt his calf again. They said it's going to be a while, so obviously any JJ Barea owners can move on from him, and that really strengthens what Seth Curry can do. He had 30 minutes again here, Seth, 15 and 3 with a steal. And Wes Matthews had 11, 8 and 3 with 2 steals. They're pretty decent nights from those two guys. While Dirk wasn't great, 3 points for Dirk on 1 of 13 shooting, 10 rebounds. You still want to own Dirk, but that is a horrific performance, while Darren Williams had 16, 4 and 8, and the pencil dropped in 19 and 5 in a pretty empty line, which is basically stock standard for him these days. The last game of the night, it was the Indiana Pacers and the Los Angeles Lakers. The Lakers get a big victory over the Pacers. Paul George, 21, 6 and 2, 2 steals, 3 triples and a block in a very efficient night. While Thad Young, 5 steals. He is getting steals at a ridiculous rate at the moment. He had 6 steals 2 games ago, 5 steals here, really just racking them up. 9, 8 and 3 with those 5 steals and a block, while Miles Turner had 15 and 4 with 3 steals and 2 blocks, really taking advantage of those Lakers big men. As did Al Jefferson, who chimed in with 20 and 6 in 17 bench minutes. That shouldn't really influence what you do with Al Jefferson in any leagues. Jeffy Teague had 11, 3 and 7 with a triple one, and Monte Ellis scored 1 point. He had a triple one. 1 point, 1 steal, 1 block. Didn't have any threes, just the one point. So yeah, we know where to leave. We know where to leave Monte Ellis in leagues. For the Lakers, D'Angelo Russell hurt his knee after just 1 minute, ended up with a knee sprain and a calf strain. You would think, he said it's not too bad. I would think he misses at least a game, but he did say it wasn't too bad. Nick Young also hurt his knee but re-entered the game and ended with 15 points with 5 triples. Julius Randle had 16, 5 and 4, and it was going to be interesting to see how Ivica Zubats did after a big game in the last one. Well, he played just 6 minutes, 4 points and 1 rebound. That's why it wasn't a great idea to rush and grab him in standards. I think he is going to be an impactful player down the stretch, but it's not ready to happen just yet. Tim Mozgov had 4 and 11 with 2 steals and 2 blocks in 25 minutes in this one, while Tariq Black played 28 and went 8 and 13. Zubats had his issues in this one, matching up with Al Jefferson. Jordy Clarkson saw 33 minutes. He had 12 and 5 and also nabbed 5 steals. So a big Jordy Clarkson game. I still think he's a 10-team fringe guy, while Lou Williams had 27 points with 4 triples in his 30 minutes. That does it for the games from Friday. Well, I'm going to take a quick break, and then we're going to be back to preview a monster 11-game Saturday in the NBA.
Now I had a dream of you on that cold September night. I had nothing left to look forward to. I thought you were all I wanted, but I never really knew just what you could do. Never want to leave you 'cause I think it's worth to be.
Alright guys, we're back. Let's talk perfect DFS lineups. On FanDuel, Kemba Walker had 46.8 and Mike Conley had 38.6. Shooting guards, Garrett Temple, 28.1 and Lou Williams, 37.3. Kevin Durant, 54.3. Gordie Hayward, 41.4. Power forwards, Frank the Tanks at 34.1. And Thad Young's at 35.1. And at centre, Rudy Gobert, 61.5 for a total of 377.2, and that cost $59,900. On DraftKings, Kemba at 51, Karis LeVert at 36.25, Kevin Durant at 56, Ilyasova at 40.5, Bismack Biyombo at 40.25, Lou Williams at 41, and Gordon Hayward at 44.75, with Rudy Gobert rounding it out at 65.75 for a total of 375.5, and that gave us $49,800. Before we get into previewing this game, just talk about a couple of trade rumors that were floating around. The word is that Yusuf Nurkic is definitely going to be traded, so lots of speak. Yeah, do I stash him? And in general, I'm against the stash of a player for numerous reasons. A, does the trade go through? Maybe, maybe not. Does it go to a team where there's an advantage? And I'm going to do some research on this, but I want to check the last couple of trade deadlines and see which players actually got impacted heavily by trades at the deadline. We'll see how many of those guys that actually changed teams made an impact. But I'm going to do a bit of a study on that, so I don't have those numbers in front of me. But who needs a starting center in the NBA? And who would be willing to deal for Jusuf Nurkic and give up something to get him? These are the questions that we have to look at. Dallas would love him, I think. But what do they give up? Justin Anderson, that doesn't feel like it's going to be enough. That Denver's going to say, yeah, that's fine for us. I don't think that Denver would be keen on that. Who else would look at it? Would the Lakers look at it? Maybe, but Zubats, they just invested in Mozgov. What are they going to do with... Nurkic would probably start in that situation, but maybe play 22 minutes and split it with Mozgov. Portland, I think Plumlee is probably a better player than him at this point. The Knicks, they just invested big money in Joakim Noah and Kristaps Porzingis. His best position is center. Where does he go that doesn't put him into a backup role? Or if there's an opportunity for him to go somewhere, what can they give up to get him? The other trade rumor that came out, Reggie Jackson for Ricky Rubio, just seems ridiculous to me. It just makes no sense. Now, Stan Van Gundy's come out and basically just said, like, you blokes are screwed. Like, this is just not happening. And we know that general managers will generally deny this, but as pretty much always happens, any trade rumor that comes out is a trade that may have been discussed and was shot down. That's pretty much what happens. Oh, you could have had this trade could happen. Yeah, it's already happened. It's already been discussed. It's been brought up saying, man, what do you think for Ricky for Reggie? And yeah, good one, Matt. Yeah, no worries. And that's the end of the discussion. And then it comes out later, rumor, trade for this. They're not something that's necessarily ongoing. If that did happen, it would be a little bit of a bump for Reggie Jackson. It might hurt Rubio marginally, but not much changes, and the fit of Reggie Jackson in Minnesota would just feel really weird because he's just a chucker who's not a good defender and not a great distributor, and putting them alongside Zach LaVine, who is the same, and Andrew Wiggins, who is also the same, I don't really see how that would make any sense to anybody. But what do I know? I am not an NBA GM. I'm just one that gets confused by some of the decisions they make on a very regular basis. Let's talk about Portland and the Boston Celtics, which is the first game up. It is an early game. It starts at 5 p.m. Eastern, so check your contest to see whether it's included on the Aussie sites. I believe it's not included on Draft Stars, so check Moneyball to see if it's around as well, and just have a look to see whether it's in your contests. You've got another game that appears at 6 p.m. Eastern, and then you've got the regular couple of games at 7, a couple at 7:30, one at 8, 8:30, and then they all finish off by 9. So a little bit of a weird day in the NBA again, and then we've got a very, very quiet Sunday coming up after that. Let's talk Portland, let's talk Boston. We're going to start where we always do with the point guards in this matchup, and it's Dame Lillard. Lillard again put up 35 points today. That's fine, but it's also not fine at 8,400. We know that he is just a GPP option. That is literally it. This is a positive matchup for him against Boston, but it's still not enough to look at him in cash. As for Isaiah Thomas, well, the salary's come down to 9,200. That's getting closer, and at 8,900 on DraftKings, it still just doesn't feel like I want to invest that cash in him. Yes, on DraftKings, he's averaging 48 over the last 3, but he'd want to be averaging 48 if I'm spending $9,000 on him. On FanDuel, he's averaging 44 at 92. It's not enough. I just don't... I can't see this being... And with 11 games on, there are other directions that I would rather go and spend my money. Avery Bradley is out, so Marcus Smart will likely get another start. He's at 5,500 on FanDuel, which is not an appealing price. He's at 54 on DraftKings. Again, not a very appealing price, so not a lot to love there. And CJ McCollum, just too high. 8,100 on FanDuel. He's at 71 on DraftKings, which is a little bit better. But with Marcus Smart potentially guarding him, and the fact that he's still priced at a level where he was when Lillard was out, makes him pretty much a no-go in my opinion. Small forwards, well, what are the Celtics actually doing? Not the Celtics. What are the Blazers doing at small forward? Is Evan Turner starting again? Is Mo Harkless coming back? At this point, nothing. What's good about it? Like 19 points for Evan Turner in his start today. that's not good. Mo Harkless had 12 off the bench, and they're both priced at 4,400. That just makes all of them, or neither of them, really worth even caring about. Jay Crowder's at 56 on FanDuel. He's at 56 on DraftKings. I think that's a decent price for him. It's a somewhat positive matchup. It's a decently positive matchup for him. So I think that he has value on both sides. He's been hitting a ton of threes lately, and obviously that gives him somewhat of an extra boost over on DraftKings. Power forwards. Yeah, Amir Johnson, Myers Leonard, Ed Davis, Al-Farouq Aminu, Noah Vonleh. Yeah, Vonleh did have 18 points today. He's at 3,600, so maybe that floats your boat. Doesn't really float mine at all. At 3,000 on DraftKings, if they say he's starting, yeah, that might have tournament upside. But I would say that today is almost his best case scenario, where he had 10 and 6. Like, that's his best case scenario in my opinion, and that's not really moving the needle into a winning lineup in a GPP. So he is far from an exciting guy. At centre, well, Kelly Olynyk, he went from 42 points to 8, as is Brad Stevens' will. Good matchup, brilliant matchup against Portland, but what does Stevens do with Olynyk? That's the risk. In GPPs, there's huge upside. In cash, there's no chance. And Mason Plumlee on the other side of things, he's at 6,300. Now, I don't hate it on FanDuel. In fact, I think it's still pretty good in terms of mid-price centers. There's not many better ones. On DraftKings, I'm a bigger fan at 5,500. I think he should easily be able to get to 30 points in a matchup with the Celtics. So I do like Mason Plumlee there in that scenario. All right, the next game we'll take a look at, we've got the Washington Wizards taking on the Detroit Pistons. The Pistons are favored by 1.5. The total here is 211. We need to check the status of a couple of Pistons players, Johnny Lua and Kentavious Caldwell-Pope. If these guys are out, we're going to get more minutes for Marcus Morris, more for Toby Harris, more for Reggie Bullock, and more for Stan Johnson. That's the guy. You're going to get more minutes for those players. Now, Bullock and Johnson become GPP upside guys, whereas Harris and Morris firm more as cash type of players in that scenario. Let's talk point guards. Johnny Wall is at a tick under 10,000 on FanDuel. He's at 9,900, which is obviously a fair amount of cash to spend up on Johnny. He's at 95 on DraftKings. John Wall has been putting up good numbers. He dropped 58 in the last game. He's averaging 49 across the last 3. It is a positive matchup for him against Detroit. He's got a good record against them. No issues. On DraftKings, I really like it. I think it's a great play at 9,500 on DraftKings. Not quite as on board on FanDuel, but still think there's a lot of value in getting John Wall. Now, as for Reggie Jackson, now he takes on the John Wall defense, which is a real problem, and it's been a problem for Jackson in the past as well. At 6,600 on DraftKings, 64 on FanDuel, I reckon there are many other point guards that I would rather go with than him. At shooting guard, Bradles Beal has struggled. He's at 6,600. He dropped a whopping 14 points in the last game. He does have upside. If KCP plays, KCP will spend some time on Beal and he will spend some time on Wall. And if Beal gets hot, you'll see a lot more KCP on him, and that could spell the end for the hotness from Brad Beal. I would look at it as a GPP, but I'm not all that interested, and same with him over on DraftKings at 6,600. That's not really happening for me. KCP, I won't be using him, but he does have an impact if he plays defensively. Marcus Morris, he had 37 points in the last game on FanDuel. He's at 5,100. If Lua is out, then, and KCP, if they're both out, it is a bump for Morris. So 5,100, he becomes an interesting play. At 6,200 on DraftKings, I reckon that's a stretch, even if both of those blokes are out. And Otto Porter just keeps cranking out numbers. He's at 6,300, dropped 37 in the last game. This might be pushing it just a little bit too far for Otto, up to 6,000 on DraftKings as well. But he's very rarely disappointed us this season, so I could consider going back to that well. Not overly sold with it, though. Talked about Stan Johnson already when I incorrectly called him Stan Jackson, but he would only be worth looking at in that scenario where KCP is out. At power forward, Markieff Morris against his brother, 6,300, has been putting up that sort of value on in a pretty significant level recently, averaging 38 points over the last 3. 6,300 in a Detroit matchup, which is, gives him a little bit of a boost. It's not a terrible matchup, but it does give him a minor boost. I can see him being usable without being a must roster guy. Same with him on DraftKings at 6,200 there as well. While Toby Harris at $6,000, Well, it's just what I said before. If Lua is out, and in particular, if both him and KCP are out, then Toby Harris at 6,000 feels like a relatively rock-solid cash play. DraftKings, I'm less interested at 6,100 though. At centre, Marcin Gortat, he's just not doing it for me. And Andre Drummond at 8,000, just a GPP. For Andre Drummond, he can go big, he can go small, and that's the definition of a GPP. At 7,300 on DraftKings, he's pushing the cash buttons a little bit, but it is still somewhat of a risky proposition, just not all that risky. So I'm on board with Drummond on cash on DraftKings, just because that price is so low. On FanDuel, I think he's more of a GPP type of a player. The next game we'll take a look at, we've got the victorious Brooklyn Nets and the victorious Charlotte Hornets, both who had huge blowout victories on Friday. The Hornets are favoured by 12 here. The total is 220. Be prepared for Brook Lopez to be out of this one. Nothing has been mentioned here, but they already rested Trevor Booker and Sean Kilpatrick on the first half of a back-to-back. Be prepared for Lopez not to play. Again, I don't know that that's happening. I don't necessarily think that it's happening, but be prepared for him to be out, and that would open up some minutes for Justin Hamilton, and in turn, that opens up some minutes for Rondé Hollis-Jefferson at the 4 also. So do pay attention to that, because it could be impactful. Jeremy Lamb might return for Charlotte, and if he does, that could impact Michael Kidd-Gilchrist numbers, who's been a relatively solid cash game sort of a play recently. We'll talk point guards first. Kemba, who was the monstrous line of the night today, he's at 7,900 on FanDuel. I think that's a really good price for him. The matchup is almost as good as it gets. He dropped 47 today. He's averaging 38 across the last 5. Sub 8,000 price, taking on the Nets for a really good point guard. Really hard to go past Kemba at that sort of a salary. If we have a look at him over on DraftKings, it's a similar story where he's at $8,000. Yes, he's higher, but his output has been higher as well, given the scoring system. The matchup is brilliant. No issue with Kemba Walker. He is one of the better point guard plays on the entire slate. The Nets point guard, Spencer Dinwiddie, Isaiah Whitehead, very tough to use them. You might consider Dinwiddie a punt, but I don't really think that's in your best interests. Sean Kilpatrick is a no thanks. Nick Batum at 7,400 has been good. The matchup here is really good for him as well, but he hasn't quite been giving us $7,400 worth of value. On DraftKings at 7,600, I feel a little bit better about it just because his ability to hit those threes. But on FanDuel at 74, I'm not totally buying that. Obviously, I'm not buying Marco Bellinelli either. At small forward, Michael Kidd-Gilchrist is at 51. He's averaging 25 over the last 3. He's averaging 25 over the last 5. That's fine with me. If Lamb is in, it might make him a little bit harder to use. But if Lamb is out, I feel like he's a solid cash investment. 5,100 on DraftKings, exact same story with him. A really nice positive matchup for him as well. Bojan Bogdanovic is always a GPP option. He dropped 35 at 4,100 today. That's the exact sort of return you want out of your GPP guys. While Rondé Hollis-Jefferson at 4,600, I just don't have the faith in him to invest that sort of cash. Caris LeVert at 41. What do we do with Caris? Obviously a massive game from him today. He had 33 points on FanDuel. He's averaging 25 over the last 3, but at 4,100, you're almost relying upon him to shoot 75% to return that sort of value. And I'm pretty sure I don't really trust Caris LeVert to do that. On DraftKings, on the other hand, he's at 3,400. He dropped 36 today. He's averaging 27, and that is fine as a GPP. You get me 27, you get me 30, which we've seen him have the ability to do. I do worry just a little bit about this being a back-to-back and they want to ease him in slowly what they do with him. But there's obviously no cash reliability for him. At power forward, Frank the Tank is so tough to use. He's at 3,800. Had a monster today and you would have loved that, but why would you have really even considered playing Frank the Tank in most scenarios? So he's a stay away, while Trevor Booker is back, but really, who cares? Marvin Williams at 4,900, I don't really think that he's having too much of an impact either. At centre, Cody Zeller has been down. He's at $5,000 still. He's obviously got the production on the board prior to these last couple of games. The projections do really love him. I'm finding it a little bit harder to get on board with him just with the way that Clifford has used him these last 2 games, even though there were factors. There was blowout factors, there were foul troubles. Just want to see him get the 30 minutes consistently. I do get the feeling that he's going to have a pretty good role here and at least be able to get you 25 points, but I'm feeling less certain about it than what I would have a couple of days ago. Brookie Lopez at 7,400. He's at 6,700 on DraftKings, which is fantastic. Again, if he plays, that is fantastic stuff over there on DraftKings, and it's a good matchup. On FanDuel, I'm not quite so sure that I'm interested in that at 7,400. Obviously, Justin Hamilton gets the bump if Brook Lopez happens to be out, and he's at sub 4,000, so that would be a very interesting investment. Let's move on to the next one. It's Philadelphia taking on the Atlanta Hawks. The Hawks are favored by 10, and the total is 200. As I mentioned earlier, Joel Embiid is out. Mike Muscala is listed as questionable for Atlanta. If he misses, you'll get a little bit more Chrissy Humphries. You'll get some more Mike Scott as well, which I'm sure that's what everyone cares about and wants to see, just as much Mike Scott as possible. Let's talk point guards in this one. We don't know exactly. Actually, for the Sixers, we don't know who will start in place of Embiid at this point, whether it's Okafor or Noel. I'm guessing Okafor. I hope it's Noel. And regardless of who starts, I hope it's Noel that gets the 28 minutes. That's not the way I'm thinking it's going to be at the moment, but it's going to be interesting to see exactly what they do. At point guard, Dennis Schroeder is at 6,300. He dropped 35 in just 27 minutes today. He seems to be back on track, so I've got no issue with using Schroeder, especially in a game where Embiid is not playing, because he creates such a negative impact for other teams in terms of defensive stuff that he's not there. Noel's fine, but he's not Embiid. And it's also not the combination of Embiid and Noel where you've got 48 minutes of elite rim protection. You've got Okafor and Noel, so you've got 20 minutes of elite rim protection, and you've got 28 minutes of turnstiles. So that helps Schroeder in that sense. TJ McConnell at 5,500. He's playing well, but he's not really returning $5,500 worth of value, and that's a tough one to go with. 5,400 for him on DraftKings, but we must remember, playing the Hawks is fantastic. It's almost as good as playing the Nets if you're a point guard. Is that enough of a bump for TJ? I say no, but it is something to consider. Spanish chocolate? Nah. Shooting guards. Well, let's ignore the Sixers guys, Gerald Henderson, Nick Stauskas, Timothé Luwawu-Cabarrot. I don't think they're doing enough. Tim Hardaway Jr. for the Hawks. He's at 4,600. Just say it along with me. He's a GPP guy, and we all know this. At this point, he has struggled the last couple of games. The small forwards, Tabo Cephalosha is at minimum salary on FanDuel. He dropped 22 today, but prior to that, he's averaging 13 across the last 5. That's not enough. Nowhere near enough, even at that minimum salary. And at 36 on DraftKings, yeah, nice numbers, but recently had been pretty putrid. I would look at him as a GPP only sort of a player, and even then, how big's the upside? The answer's not big. 45 for Kent Bazemore. Let's leave Kent Bazemore to the others so we don't deal with that sort of heartache. 5,200 for Bob Cup. After a little stretch where his minutes were limited and he was playing 27 a night, he's back up to 33 over the last 3. He's getting 26 points a night, including 31 today. Is that enough to justify spending $5,000 on him? I'm not sure that it is. And at 55 on DraftKings, I'm even less sure of that being a worthwhile investment. At power forward, Paul Millsap is at 8,200 on DraftKings, on FanDuel, sorry, he's at 77 on DraftKings. I think he's fine to use on both sites. Really feel okay about that again, especially without Embiid out there. The other power forwards, Nerlens Noel. I absolutely love Noel here as a GPP guy, assuming that he gets the minutes at center. That's not how I'm assuming it goes down at this moment. But on the off chance it happens, Noel can go out there and put up 45 points because he can go out there and have 4 blocks and 3 steals and 10 boards and 12 points and do that in 27 minutes. He can do that. So that makes him a GPP guy. Ersan Ilyasova, big performance today, 5,800. How likely is Ilyasova to back that up? I'll probably go ahead and say not all that likely. He's been good and he's been relatively consistent. And at 5,800, that's not terrible, especially for cash games. It can obviously be used. I just don't think it's the best spot for it. Šarić, no. Center, Jahlil Okafor, 4,600. If we hear, and Brett Brown has been specific at times. I wish I could do the Brett Brown accent, the Boston/Australian accent. I was going to attempt it, but I haven't even practiced it, so it's probably going to come out horrible. Do I do it? Nah, I can't. I got to practice it off air. Maybe I'll come back with a Brett Brown another day. Jahlil Okafor at 4,600. Like, Brown comes out and says, we're going to start Jahlil and we're going to play him 28 minutes. And you go, all right, cool. Thanks, Brett. And then he goes out there and starts him and plays him 28 minutes. And you go, you know what, Brett? No wonder you're one of the good guys. You lived in Australia for so long. Makes sense. If he plays 28 minutes, 4,600 for Jahlil Okafor is a good price. He can score. He can grab rebounds. He can do sweet FA apart from that. But he can do those things, and that might be enough at 4,600. On DraftKings, he's at 5,300, so they've all gone ahead and just give him the $1,000 bump, and I'll just go ahead and give him the Texas Rattlesnake double middle finger and say, I'm not having any of that. Thank you very much. Jalil Okafor. Dwight Howard has been limited. He's at $7,000. It's a positive matchup, even with Embiid in there for opposition centers. And now there's no Embiid. So I'm okay with Dwight. I think that we could look at Howard as an option, but I think he's more of a GPP type of a guy. I'm really not all that keen on him in cash game scenarios. Let's move on to the next game. Milwaukee and Miami. The Heat are favored by 2, and the total is 206 points here. This is a game where the fantasy value is not really brilliant, to be honest. Yes, there's guys like Jabari Parker, Giannis, Goran Dragic, but the matchup itself is not screaming brilliance to me. The low total, 206. The fact that it's a tight game gives me a little bit of hope, but it's not an awesome situation. As for Dragic at 7,100, he's been killing it, but we know Bucks and point guards, they don't mix well. So it's probably a good spot to fade him. I'll say the same with Tyler Johnson. Despite him averaging 30 over the last 3, there is no chance that I am getting $6,000 and laying it out on Tyler Johnson. I just can't see that being a viable proposition. And Malcolm Brogdon's getting the minutes back. He's got 27 points today. He's averaging 27 over the last 3. And that would be good if he was at 4,800, but he's at 5,400. So it's basically at the right spot. And at the right spot is not the way you extract value in DFS. So Brogo is out for me. Shooting guard Dion Waiters at 5,200. That is way too high. I don't know why Dion Waiters is priced that highly. 5,400 on DraftKings as well. That is a big forget about it. And Yanni at 11,100. Sky high. Not producing Yanni at that level. Sorry, I love him, but he's not producing at that level. 47-point average in the last 5, which is good. It's not $11,000 good. Yes, he can have those games. Can he do it in a slowed down game against the Heat? He probably can. I would be looking at Yanni as just a GPP type of play at this point. He is not screaming value in this scenario. Mick Beasley, who'd been playing fantastic, he got kitted today, 4 points in 7 minutes. He's at 4,600. He can easily go for 25 or 26 against a former team. Revenge factor. I hate that, but I just like throwing it out there sometimes. Yeah, probably a tough one to go with Beasley. On DraftKings at 4,100, that's a good GPP spot for him, but I don't really love it on FanDuel. Power forwards. Jabari, 7,400. A nice 37-point game today. Hasn't really been getting to that level recently. It's a significantly negative matchup here for him against the Heat as well. I don't really think he's in a good spot. I think he's a GPP guy, and even then, I'm not all that keen on his upside. The other guy we look at is Jimmy Johnson. Yes, Jimmy Johnson, who disappointed us in the last game. He was not our martyr. He was not our only son. He was at 6,100 in that game, and he put up 17 points. Now, that was because he just couldn't shoot anything, but he has been putting up fairly consistent numbers. This matchup is a positive for him. We've seen big men go off against Milwaukee pretty regularly this year. I like Jim Johnson at 61 and at 58 on DraftKings. A bit of a bounce-back performance, I hope, is on the cards. I do believe that it is, though. Hassan Whiteside at 8,500. Well, we talk about big men going off against Milwaukee. He's got a good record against Milwaukee. His recent record in general has been horrible, averaging only 36 over the last 5. And at 8,500, you want a lot more than that. But GPP upside for him is in a good spot. 78 at DraftKings, even better. So I like him over on DraftKings. I'd even consider him maybe a cash play on DraftKings. I wouldn't be too over. I wouldn't be locking him in as my first guy and going, yep, got to have Whiteside. But it's not a horrible situation for him to be used in cash. Speaking of horrible situations, John Henson and Greg Monroe, neither of those guys are really worth my time or effort in DFS situations, I don't believe, especially Henson, given how Jason Kidd is murdering him once again. Phoenix and the Knicks. The Knicks are favored by 6. The total is 221. Joakim Noah is listed as questionable. If he is out again, I don't know what Hornacek will do. Will he get his cock out again and go with the big lineup? Will he go Porzingis, Mallow, and O'Quinn? I don't think that Porzingis is remaining on the bench after coming off the bench in the last game, or does he go and play Kuzminskas, Anthony, Porzingis, which is what he should do. I don't know if that'll be the case, but it's going to be interesting to see. Obviously, if Noah is out, O'Quinn comes into GPP considerations. He could have a big game, but if he plays the minutes, he is going to have a big game. That's pretty much what he does. It's just getting those minutes that is the challenge at this point. Eric Bledsoe at point guard has been crushing it. He is at $8,300. It's a pretty decent price on FanDuel. It's a lot of money. He's averaging 47 across the last three, so obviously that repays it, and it's not as if Derrick Rose and his Knicks defensive buddies are defensing anything at the moment. They are allowing plenty of numbers. They are horrible defensively, so I think that Bledsoe has value to be looked at in both formats. $8,500 on DraftKings, you're probably pushing a little bit too much there. That's an extra $800 over his salary in the last game, but he's literally averaging 50 points in his last three games on DraftKings, so that's obviously a pretty decent return on that salary. Derrick Rose, 6,600 on FanDuel. Great matchup against Phoenix, but do we get 6,600 out of Derrick? I'll say no. On DraftKings at 6,400, do we get that out of him? I'll say maybe we can get closer to that on DraftKings, but Rose is really, really tough to consider as a cash game play at this point in his career, I believe. Ronnie Baker, who started the last three games, he's at minimum salary, and there's a good reason for that. He doesn't do anything in a start, so don't get sucked into him. He's at 3,200 on DraftKings, and even that really doesn't get me tempted. Courtney Lee, after getting benched, has played big minutes in the last games. He still does nothing, so don't get fooled. And 3,800 is not a good situation for Lee. 3,300 for Lee on DraftKings is interesting. You get 20 points, which that's almost probably the limit of what he can do, but 20 points at 3,300 is nice. It's value, and it fits some other studs into your lineup, whether that is Jimmy Harden, whether that's Yanni, whether that's Jimmy Butler, whether it's one of those guys. Getting a Lee in there, getting 20 points, which might feel like it's a bit tough at this point. That might allow some of those other guys to fit into your roster a little bit easier. Devin Booker is at 6,500. You love what he's doing at the moment. He's averaging 37 across the last five. He's averaging 34 across the last three. He's being fairly consistent. But that price is pretty high for a guy that gets all his value from scoring. He doesn't really do a huge amount of those other areas. He's done a little bit in the last couple of games, but not consistently enough. So I would look at Booker as a guy that I will probably leave alone on this slate. Small forwards, TJ Warren, big minutes, 40 in the last one, 29 points. That's great. Do we trust it again? Well, I can never fully trust Earl Watson, but I'm feeling a little bit better about TJ, and at 4,600, I'm fine with it. DraftKings at 4,400, I think there's almost no risk in that. I can't say there's no risk because Watson's a dick, but there's very limited risk at that sort of a salary to use him. As for Mallow, 7,900, he had 50 in the last game. That's great. He's at 7,900 on both sites. I got no problem with him taking on Phoenix and getting 40 points. It doesn't feel like it's that much of a stretch for Carmelo Anthony. PJ Tucker's not an interesting player. While with the return of Porzingis, Mindaugas Kuzminskas is not a player he only got 18 minutes in the last game. He was really playing well before that, but now that we've seen how Hornacek runs things with Porzingis back, and Porzingis potentially getting an extra 4 to 5 minutes, Kuzminskas is probably going to lose out there. As for Kristaps, he's at 7,900 on FanDuel. No, he's not. He's at 7,200. That's a good salary. He's only averaging 25 points over the last five, but there's been a lot of Achilles-induced flops in those. I think at 7,200, you can look at him. DraftKings, 6,800. I feel really confident about getting that sort of value out of him against Phoenix. It is a very positive matchup for a player like him. You should have no issue with getting 35 points out of Porzingis here. So I think that there's real value in him, especially over on DraftKings. As for Marquise Chris, well, no. Yeah, look, I thought he was a chance against Phoenix. Didn't really come through. 3,600. It's a good matchup for him against the Knicks. Has had a big game against them already this year, so I would keep him in GPP consideration, but that's really about it for him. At centre, Tyson Chandler against his former team. Yeah, there's tremendous value here. 5,700 for Tyson, dropped 44 against the Cavs. He's averaging 36 across the last three on FanDuel and DraftKings. I think he's one of the better centres that you can put into a lineup. And I believe on the other day I said I liked him, and then 5 seconds later I said I didn't like him. The second one I didn't like was Alex Len. So I do like Tyson Chandler. I like him. Alex Len, I don't like. He is probably going to get single digits in minutes, and that means single digits in fantasy points. As for the Knicks centers, well, if Noah is playing, then they're all a write-off. If Noah is out, then Kylo Quinn is the guy we look at 4,600. But he did have a good game in the last one, so that probably means 5 to 6 minutes only for him coming and going by the Hornacek school of basketball rotations. And if you're unaware, that's written in invisible ink. Let's move on to the next game. Who does it involve? It involves the Houston Rockets. They're taking on the Memphis Grizzlies. The Rockets are favored by 1, and the total is 216. I expect Nene and Chandler Parsons to both be back. They both missed Friday due to rest. The Troy Daniels is questionable. He left Friday's game with a knee problem. That's not really impacting us too much. To be honest, Chandler Parsons and Nene don't have a massive impact. They take away any upside of Jimmy Ennis, and they take away a lot of the cash reliability of the table and Clint Capella for Houston as well, with both of those guys back. Let's talk point guards. Mike Conley at 7,700. Yeah, Pat Beverly can be an issue for him. I still think that Conley has some value at that price. It's not brilliant value, but it's still okay. He doesn't put himself in the great group of point guards on this day, but on DraftKings at 7,400, that's a better situation for him. So I can totally get behind him over on DraftKings as opposed to on FanDuel. As for Pat Bev, 5,700. Bad matchup, lower pace. I don't think I really trust Beverly at 5,700 against the Grizzlies. He's at 51 on DraftKings, so that's a lot better. He had a $500 price drop, so I do think that Pat Bev can be used over on DraftKings. It's a little tougher on FanDuel. At shooting guard, Tone Allen's at 4,600. I don't want to discuss that really. 12,200 for Jimmy Harden. Horrible performance today. He hasn't done well against Memphis in the past. And depending on how you structure things, but with 11 games on, I think that Harden is not a must-play. I think he is a fine fade target. It's a back-to-back. It's a not good situation. It's a $12,000 plus salary. I do think that you can do better than Jim. He's at 11.4 on DraftKings, and the exact same advice applies for him there. I wouldn't be using him. Eric Gordon has not been good, and he has definitely not been $6,000 worth, averaging just 18 over the last 3 games. Very tough to use him in this negative matchup here as well. A couple of small forwards at cheap prices are GPP options, Sammy Decker and Vince Carter. Both guys are putting up decent numbers, are getting some decent minutes. Decker, with Ryan Anderson ruled out for this one, I hope he gets to upper 20s in minutes. I don't know if it will happen because Corey Brewer is thieving minutes continually. But Decker's a guy that does have upside, but it's strictly a GPP type of situation. That's it. Jimmy Ennis, no. Trevor Ariza, I don't feel confident with Trevor Ariza. And obviously same with Chandler Parsons. Jermichael Green and Zach Randolph, they're alternating good games at the moment. Green is a lot cheaper. I still think that Green is worth a look in this matchup at 4,600, but I don't feel super confident with it. I'd feel a bit better about him in a GPP, but I'm not really that in love with him here. Marcus Gasol at 8,200. Well, on FanDuel, we know the story. It just feels way too high. This matchup is not bad for him though, so I will say if there's a time you want to use Marcus Gasol, this is probably the time to do it. 7,300 on DraftKings, absolutely no issue. He's averaging 46 across the last 3, continues to be ridiculously underpriced on DraftKings, so no issue with using Gasol. As for the Rockets centers, the table, Montrezl Harrell and Clint Capella, or how do you have a crack at them? Well, Capella played 21 minutes and scored 40 points today. It was a huge performance. But Harrell played 27 minutes. Nene's coming back into the mix. I would put Capella in a GPP at 4,600, but that's probably as far as I would go with these guys. All right, let's move on to the next game now. We're going to talk San Antonio and Cleveland. We know that Pau Gasol is out for the Spurs, out for They're saying a month or two. We don't have the full timetable yet, but he is having surgery. So that is obviously not a great scenario. Kevin Love and Tony Parker both missed their last games for their respective teams. So we need to check their status. In Parker's absence, DeJounte Murray went off. He would start again. He wouldn't necessarily play 34 minutes and score 24 points, but he would start and get 20-odd minutes while Patty Mills gets 24 to 25. And both those guys would become GPP options. If Kevin Love is out, you're going to get James Jones starting, but Channing Frye is going to be the play there. And Iman Shumpert maybe gets a little bit of extra playing time in a scenario like that one. We don't know exactly what is happening with the replacement for Powell. David Lee stepped in for him at the last minute, but I do think that it's going to be a split decision between him and Dwayne Dedman, and both of those guys are GPP type of plays until we find out exactly what's going down. I think that we'll hear that Dedman is starting, and that gives him value there, but I'm not sure on that at this point. At point guard, yeah, I don't really like any of these guys here. I could consider Kyrie in a GPP. He's at 7,900. He's got a pretty good record against the Spurs. Tone Parker's going to have his issues staying in front of him. So I think Kyrie is okay there, but the projections do not love him. I think that he's got GPP upside. I wouldn't be getting really interested in Tone Parker or Pat Mills here in this one. At shooting guard, Danny Green is at 3,600. That's great because he barely ever gets anywhere over that sort of value. While Iman Shumpert's putting up some good numbers. Shumpert's at 4,000 on FanDuel. I have no issue with considering Shumpert a player to use. And at 3,900 on DraftKings, the dude's averaging 27.5 over the last three. He's stepped up his game since he's been included as a starter. He's hitting threes. He's getting steals. On DraftKings, he's averaging 27.5, and at 3,900, very hard to go past that. I think there is value in using Shumpert. The problem is they play the Spurs, so that's not a great matchup to put your faith in Iman Shumpert. Kyle Korver doesn't deserve faith either. Small forwards, LeBron, 10,500. Now, he does get Kawhi, but it is LeBron, so you give him somewhat of a benefit of the doubt. Yeah, I think 50 points out of LeBron is far from expecting too much. I think that's no problem. For him, he's at 10.6 on DraftKings, same story. Get your 50 and get out. I think you get over 50, to be honest. As for Kawhi, he's up to 9,600. That might be a little bit high. He's on a real hot streak at the moment. The matchup it's probably about neutral for him against LeBron, but 9,600 is really pushing the friendship. 92 on DraftKings, that I can get behind. I think Kawhi is definitely more usable on DraftKings, but FanDuel's making it just a little bit tougher for me. The power forwards, Kevin Love, no thanks. Dave Lee at 4,900. That's a massive $1,400 price rise on FanDuel, so obviously they're reacting to that big game in the last one. He's at 48 on DraftKings. I don't think I'd want to use him in cash. In fact, I'm sure I wouldn't. I would definitely be considering him a GPP guy, but that increase in salary is almost taking the value out of that, so that makes him a little bit of a harder guy to use there. While LaMarcus Aldridge at 7,500, he's really struggling to get anywhere near that value. Only had 24 in the last game. Yeah, this could be an opportunity with Gasol out. I'm not really reading it that way. I'm not really getting excited about LaMarcus. 6,800 on DraftKings. Yeah, look, it's a low price, but it's still really not working for me. And as I said, Chan Fry had 35 for the Cavs in the last game. If Love is out, we can go back to him. Dwayne Dedman's at 3,900. I think there's great GPP value in him. I do think that they give him the nod at the starter, or at least play him 20 plus minutes, which at 3,900, he's a point per minute guy. Give him 20 minutes, that's 20 points. At 3,900, the value's back. 3,800 for him on DraftKings, no issues at all until we hear more information. But I think that there is a GPP value in Dwayne Dedman. Tristan Thompson does well against the Spurs, which I think most people wouldn't be aware of. He's like a fantasy point per minute guy against them. At 4,700, I think that he is absolutely worth a look. He's had some decent numbers against them in the past. I think that he's a fine play to look at. Let's move on to the next game. We've got 3 games to go to round out all of Saturday's action. It is a big one. There are 11 games on. If you're still sticking with the podcast, congratulations for being here. Where are we at? The Clippers and Denver. Let's get onto that one. Things are out of order on my screen. There we go. Clippers and Denver. No spread out for this one. For the Nuggets, Wilson Chandler is expected to be back. He missed the last game for a bereavement leave. And Nikola Jokic is probable with an ankle. That really hasn't been bothering him at all. The Rooster, Danilo Gallinari and Darrell Arthur are both questionable. So if we see both of those guys missing, I think we'll get one show starting. Actually, we probably won't because Wilson Chandler will be back. So I think we get Wilson Chandler starting and one show getting bench minutes and Fareed starting in place of Darrell Arthur. But one show played so well. He played 38 minutes. I think there's a chance that you could say, okay, they start one show at the 3 and Chandler at the 4, or one show and Fareed at the 3-4 and keep Chandler in the 6th man role. That could definitely be something that the Nuggets go to. We don't know the status of those guys. There's lots of things up in the air. Value abounds in this one in the backcourts particular. Ray Felton at 4,600. He dropped 31 in the first game without Chris Paul. You got to love it. He's at 57 on DraftKings, so that makes it a little bit tougher over there, but still, I think there is value in what is a positive matchup. Austin Rivers at 5,400. He had 24 points in the last game. I think he's a fair chance to get 27-28 here. Again, in a very positive matchup. Love Austin Rivers. He's at 59 on DraftKings, making it a little bit harder on DraftKings, but still, some decent-ish value, especially with the matchup that's coming his way. Emmanuel Mudiay doesn't have Chris Paul to deal with. He's at 4,900. I think he's a GPP play, and he's a really interesting GPP play in this game, which I do believe is going to be relatively tight. No spread out for it just at this point. And Jameer Nelson got some extra run in the last game. Scored 26 points in 27 minutes at 3,800. He has got GPP upside as well, but I'm not totally feeling Jameer Nelson here. Shooting guard. Jamal Crawford's dreadful. No denying that. At 3,900, he is going to go off at one point. And even in the last game where he was shithouse, he still scored 22 points. And at 3,900, that brings back value. The matchup here is very positive. I think that he is going to have a game where he goes off. And that's going to mean that people go out and start really loving him again and giving him that 6th Man of the Year award. Again, it is a joke if it happens. And anyone who votes for him for that should have voting privileges revoked. But at 3,900... there is value in Jamal. At 45 on DraftKings, that is a big no thank you. And JJ Redick at 4,700 hasn't really been attacking that sort of value with the vigor that we would like. The matchup is a beauty for him. He's a GPP type of player here. Whereas Farton Will Barton for the Nuggets, Gaz Harris is out. Farton's in. He's at 5,700. He's putting up consistent numbers, and he's been much less flaky this year as opposed to what he was last year. On DraftKings, they're making it tough. He's at 6,500, so that's probably pushing it a little bit too much, and I'm not saying that he is a great option over there. At small forward, it's the Rooster, it's Wilson Chandler. Neither of those guys are really standing out as must-play guys. If the Rooster is out, then I would look at Chandler, and if Arthur is out as well, then Wilson Chandler becomes pretty much a must-play guy. But on neither side, if everyone is available, do they really stand out as fantastic options? Nick Jokic is now 9,900. 9,900. It's $10,000 for Nick Jokic. And he's averaging 55 across the last 3. So he is caning that value. But I just think that this is getting too high. On DraftKings is at 9,300. No problem. Fine with that price. 9,900? I'm not... I don't really see it being the way to go, to be honest. I'm not fully feeling that. It is just very high. Not saying that you have to fade it at all, and it could be a really solid cash play, but it's getting to the point where, his play is ridiculous, and his price is pushing up into that zone as well. Mo Spates at 4,400, a little bit of a letdown the last game, but this is the Nuggets, man. This is a real chance for him to put up some numbers. I like Spates as a GPP big man that you can throw in there and get your 25 points at $4,000, or get 26, 27. He's got that ability, and he's got that upside to do that, man. In the last 5 games, he's had a 44-point game, which is going to kill it if you get that at 4,200. Let's talk centers, and we're going to talk DeAndre Jordan. He's at 9,100, really kept it going at 54 points in the last game without Chris Paul, without Blake Griffin. I really have my doubts that he can get you $9,100 worth of value back again, but it's against the Nuggets, and maybe that works. But for a player like Jordan, the Nuggets have actually been a significant negative for centers, and the factors really sort of work against him in this scenario. So I'm not really sure that he's the best option to play here. All right, let's go to the next game. The Sacramento Kings and the Chicago Bulls. The Bulls are favored by 6, and the total is 204. Let's talk point guards. Ty Lawson, Darren Collison, put your hands up in the air and wave them around like you just don't care. I just absolutely have no idea which way it's going to go between these two. Their GPP upside isn't even that high. To me, they are just fades. Michael Carter-Williams is also a fade. Rajon Rondo is not even a fade. He's just a nothing. There's nothing to see here at the point, because someone might go off, and if you're putting a GPP on anyone, it's going to be Lawson. But aside from that, on FanDuel, nothing really looks great. Now, Ty Lawson at 4,000 on DraftKings is definitely the pick of the bunch when you're looking at low price point guards as GPP options. He is that guy, and I feel pretty good about him over there. But the other sides, I'm not feeling quite as good about that point guard scenario. At shooting guard, Garrett Temple had a nice 28-point performance today. He's at 4,100 on FanDuel. He's not normally a big producer, but at 4,100, I feel okay about using him. I feel good about his minutes. I feel good about an increase in usage. I feel all right about using Garrett Temple at 4,100. Over on DraftKings, where he's at 4,200, probably not quite as keen, but still think that he can be used over at that salary. I think he's more a cash play than a GPP guy, to be honest. Dwayne Wade is not worth the salary. Aaron Aflalo, nor is he. Small forwards, Jim Butler is at 9,800. Has been producing nowhere near that, really, to be honest, recently. Averaging just 36 over the last 5, which is nowhere near a $10,000 price tag. On DraftKings at 9,100, I feel better about that, but I hate it on FanDuel. 9,100 on DraftKings. Yes, the matchup is a good one for him as well, taking on the Kings, but just you're hoping on a little bit of a slump breaker for Jim Butler, which is a real chance. Doug McDermott, yeah, cool. Matty Barnes at 3,700. The opportunity is there for him, but can he grab it? That's the problem, and he hasn't at this point. At power forward, we've got a couple of cheap guys here. Tony Tolliver is at 3,900. He's got the opportunity, and the Bulls can allow some big numbers from opposition power forwards. I think Tolliver is a GPP type of a player. On DraftKings at 4,300, I'm not as interested for him there. Nick Mirotic, no thanks. And Taj Gibson's at 51. At a stinker today, 8 points, but I think against the Kings power forwards, it's a great spot for him, and he should be looking at 27 plus. So I think Taj is in a really good spot. At 54 on DraftKings, I'm not quite as bullish on Taj over there, but do like him on FanDuel. At center, Robin Lopez. Yeah, that's a boogie matchup, so I'll say no to Robin. As for DeMarcus Cousins, he's at 10,600. He takes on the Bulls. 50 points should be coming his way, so it's a pretty decent spot for Boogie. 10,900 on DraftKings. If you're looking for cash, obviously, if you've got cash to spare, he's the best scoring big man on the board. So that can have value for him there, but I don't think he's a core guy to necessarily build around. Let's move on to the last game of the night. It is the Minnesota Timberwolves. They are taking on the Utah Jazz. For some reason, that's coming up and saying Indiana Pacers, and that's what it's supposed to be. I don't know why my screen's saying Minnesota. Incorrect. Forget me completely. It's the Indiana Pacers and the Utah Jazz. That is the correct matchup. Sorry for the confusion. No spread released for this game just yet. Let's get into this one. At point guard, George Hill at 6,100 against his former team. Can he come out and have a big game? If you believe in revenge factors, this is one to go for, but also believe that this is a positive matchup going against the Pacers. I don't think it's a great one for Teague. For Hill. I'm not totally falling for it. 7,600 for Jeff Teague in a negative matchup.
My name is Jeff.
There's much better point guard options on the board. At shooting guard, there is nothing. At small forward, Joe Ingles, one of the best players on the board, one of the guys that you put into a lineup real early on to get around it. 3,700 on FanDuel, 44 on DraftKings. Had just a casual 26 today at that sort of price. Gonna get the big minutes with Rod Hood out as he has the last two games. Love Joe Ingles here. Gordie Hayward at 7,400, very solid as well. I think he should be a guy that you consider almost a lock for a lineup also. He's at 72 on DraftKings. The same story suits him over there. Paulie George, I would much rather have Gordie Hayward than Paul George. It is $300 cheaper for Paul George, but I just don't feel as confident in his numbers, especially with such a negative matchup here against the Jazz. Joe Johnson had a good game today, but I don't have... if I'm spending $3,600, I'll get the extra 100 and I'll spend $37 on Joe Ingles. Power forwards, Derek Favors is come down by $700 on FanDuel. Now $4,700. That's very cheap. Everything else about him is looking good, apart from the fact that he can't shoot. I would be okay going back to the well and Derek Favors in a GPP. But that's it. It is hard to trust him in cash, but the price drop, the matchup, the actual way that he's producing isn't a bad spot. Thad Young just getting steals out of his ass every game. He's at 5,400. I reckon this is possibly a fade scenario for him. I'm not all that keen on using him here. And at centre, we look at Miles Turner. He's going to get Gobert. That is a worry, but yeah, that's it. That's the end of the sentence. That's a worry for Miles Turner going up against Rudy. As for Rudy, he's at 7,800. He has struggled the last few times he's played the Pacers, and in a big way, averaging just 21 points over the last 3 games. But that's not this Rudy Gobert. This is Rudy Gobert, the monster. He's at 7,800. I feel no problem going with him there. At 6,900 over on DraftKings.
Giggity!
That is brilliant value. That is a guy that you should be going, yeah, you know what? This is an absolute lock for my lineup. Love it. Yeah, get him in there, 6,900. Let's get 38 points at least, and let's hope for 50 upside, because he's averaging 56 across the last 3, Rudy. Really putting up the big numbers. All right, let's wrap up this monstrosity of a podcast talking about the picks of the day now. On FanDuel, Fat Face Ray Felton, 46. Austin Rivers, 54. And Bledsoe at 83. Shooting guard Jamal Crawford, 39. Fart and Will Barton's at 57. Small forward Joe Ingles, 37. Kid Gilchrist at 51. And LeBron Woods at 10.5. Power forwards Derek Favors, 47. Taj is at 51. And Millsap's at 82. And at centre, Dwayne Dedman, 39. Mason Plumlee, 63. And Boogie's at 10.6. On DraftKings, Ty Lawson, 4,000. Mike Conley, 74. And Kemba's at 8,000. Vincey Carter, 34, Nicky Batum at 76, and Jimmy Butler at 91. Small forwards TJ Warren, 44, Melo's at 79, and LeBron's at 10.6. Power forward Sammy Decker, 34, Porzingis at 68, and Boogie's at 10.9. And at centre, Dwayne Dedman, 38, Mason Plumlee, 55, and Nick Jokic at 93. On the Aussie sites, Moneyball, Ray Felton, 49, Reggie Jackson, 55, and Kemba Walker, 81. Jamal Crawford, 35, Fart and Will Barton at 53. Small forwards TJ Warren, 37, Jay Crowder, 54, and Mellows at 81. At power forward, Dave Lee at 35, Kristaps at 68, and Nerlens Noel at 35. Brook Lopez, 71, and Hassan Whiteside, 85. On Draft Stars, Ray Felton, 6.450. Derrick Rose, 10.450. Kemba Walker, 14.9. Joe Ingles, 52, Fart and Will Barton, 10,000, and Eric Bledsoe, 14.1. Small forwards, Austin Rivers, 7.550. Jimmy Johnson, 99, and Mellows at 14.9. Power forwards, Dave Lee, 5.450, and Nick Jokic, 13.4, and Boogie at 18.2. And at centre, Dwayne Dedman, 61, and Tyson Chandler, 8,700. We are done. Follow me on Twitter at redrock_bball. Check out the rest of the Locked On Podcast Network, and of course, Basketball Monster. We are done here, guys. Thank you so much for listening, everyone. See ya.